Let's start with a short invocation. Please close your eyes. Inhale and exhale slowly and deeply. Relax your body. Inhale and exhale slowly and deeply. If you feel any pain or discomfort at any area of your body, bring your awareness to that area and mentally say, I let go. I am not the body. The body is just a vehicle of the soul. I am the soul. I am that I am. Visualize your whole body disintegrate and disappear. All the pain, all the discomfort in your body disintegrate and disappear. All the cells and organs in your body disintegrate and disappear. What remains is just brilliant white light. Inhale slowly and deeply. Exhale slowly and deeply. Now bring your awareness higher to your thoughts and your emotions. Just observe each and every thought that comes to your mind and fades away. Mentally say, I am not my thoughts. I am not my emotions. Thoughts and emotions are just products of the soul. I am the soul. I am that I am. Visualize all your thoughts and emotions disintegrate and disappear. All your fears, worries, frustrations disintegrate and disappear. What remains is just brilliant white light. Inhale slowly and deeply. Exhale slowly and deeply. Now bring your awareness higher to your crown chakra located on top of your head and mentally say to the Supreme Being, Divine Father, Divine Mother, to Grandmaster Shuakok Sui, Lord Mahaguruji Mailing, and all the great ones, holy gurus, holy masters, saints, archangels, holy angels, and spiritual helpers. Thank you for all of your priceless blessings, for divine light, divine love, and divine power, divine guidance, help, and protection, inner healing and physical healing, good health and happiness, prosperity and abundance, spirituality and illumination. Thank you in full faith. Inhale slowly, inhale all the blessings. Exhale slowly and be aware of your whole body. Inhale slowly, exhale slowly. Inhale slowly, inhale all the blessings. And exhale slowly. Now please visualize every person and being in this session in front of you and mentally say, Atma, Namaste. Thank you for being here. And when you are comfortable, gently open your eyes with a big smile. So Atma Namaste. Today we have already covered discussing about the whole scheme of evolution, the 10 schemes of evolution, the earth chain, how it was built and all of this. Now we want to talk about different root races on the fourth round of the earth chain. No, on the earth chain itself, okay, but more specifically on the fourth round, which is our current round. So it's like a story. We just go through what happened and what is expected to happen in the sixth root race. If you have any idea, any inspiration, any questions, please put in the chat as always. So we covered this in the previous session that earlier rounds 1, 2, and 3 on the earth chain, development was very slow and not that much also. It took for many years. And the first round, we were not yet physical because in the first round, if you remember, we said the condition of the planets was similar to the third chain, which was the moon. So we still didn't have physical bodies. We only had etheric bodies. Means humanity, human kingdom just had etheric bodies. Then second round, we had the pudding bag type. we still didn't have this physical body, a skeleton as it is right now. It was like the cartoon Barba Papa kind of thing. The third round, we have bodies, physical bodies, but it was not yet as it is right now. It was like giant and plastic, not really like, if you remember, we said if you made the whole remained there for some time. Okay, like if you poke, for example, the whole remained there for some time. It was not yet as physical, as beautiful, as well proportionate as it is right now. So then we go to the fourth round. In the fourth round, which is the current round, initially Earth was still in a condition of terrible turmoil. Still we had giant waves, volcanoes, mountains falling, fire, storm, and this, based on the book, continued for 200 million years. So for 300 millions of years, nature spirits are at work making minerals, vegetables, animals of lower kinds. And out of the remnants of the 3 previous rounds, they have taken empty shells of forms and have tried to shape them into new living organisms. Okay, so means the whole what you call the whole nature spirits were trying to make forms for all these minerals, vegetables, animals, and the result was strange hybrid monsters of all kinds. No, like humanity was not like how we are right now. It was like half human, half animal. Again, all of this is based on the book. Okay, so previously, like when I was reading about this Greek mythology, and then you have the stories of certain characters which are half human, half animal, I was thinking it's just imagination. It's just like symbolic. But actually, when you read about this, you will understand that for humanity to be what it is right now, it actually took many, many, many years of evolution, development, incarnation. And initially, it was really half animal, half human, and then gradually reached to what it is right now. Okay. So at a point, a land gradually appeared above the ocean. Okay, so this is called Mount Meru, and is being described as the cap of the North Pole. But this North Pole is not really the geographical North Pole, but it's the spiritual pole. Okay, not geographical, which we know it now as Gobi Desert, which is also called the land of Devas. Okay, so the weather at that time was like spring at all times, and from that one land, 7 great lands appeared. Okay, and then the great Chohans, which, if you remember, we said from the moon chain they came to Earth to help the Earth chain. We call them the lords of the moon. They brought forth human. So they went each on one of these allocated lands. Okay, so initially we had one land that appeared above the ocean, and then from that land it became 7 lands, and each of these lords of the moon went into one allocated land, and they started to duplicate their own etheric bodies, materializing it and then stepping out of it. Okay, so that's how humanity started. So initially they create a certain form, and then they step out of it, and it becomes a form for another, for a human soul to use. So the forms initially were huge, sexless, and containing seeds of all forms. So there were 7 subclasses, and each subclass populates one of the 7 lands. This is what we just discussed. Representing 7 grades of evolution, contain members of each of the 7 races. So 7 times 7, 49 varieties. Okay, so we have 7 lands, and in every 7 lands, we have members of 7 races. So 7 times 7, 49 varieties. So the forms themselves were not human, but into them came entities who evolved as human beings. These 7 forms are called self-born or sons of yoga, because they use yoga to create these kind of forms. Self-born because they are not born from another human. Okay, these lords of the moon, they created certain forms and then they stepped out of it, so another human soul can go inside and use it. So that's why they were called self-born. Okay, based on the book, this is like second Adam in Jewish scriptures. So the form were results of cooperation of lords of the moon, the sun especially appearing as sun prana, and nature spirits. So all of them cooperated to make these forms. Okay. Multiplication was still like by budding, as we discussed previously. It's like they expanded in size and then got divided into 2 equal halves. So initially, when a baby was born, the baby was not like how it is right now, which is, how to say, very weak and cannot operate and needs to evolve and grow up. So initially, when, it's like you expand, the human body used to expand and then divide into 2 halves, equal halves. Then gradually, same kind of multiplication continued by dividing, but as evolving more and more, then the 2 halves were not similar size anymore. Gradually, the second half started to become smaller. Okay, so in the first round, we don't have any definite in the first root race, we don't have any definite sub-races, but we had 7 stages of growth. Okay, so in this first root race, the hearing sense were developing. Okay, so that was a summary of first root race of the 4th round. Then we go to the second root race. Earth was already settling down, more land started to appear, and then creating a vast horseshoe, continent kind of thing. So the second continent is known as Hyperborean or Plaksha. This was near Northern Asia, okay? And then later Sweden, Norway were all part of this and extended southwestward over British Isles. Climate was tropical in the beginning. It was like full of vegetables and full of vegetation. Some of it remaining now is like Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Siberia. Then nature spirit at this time started to create denser particles of matter. The first race vanished. Okay, the first race which we discussed. And then second root race appeared. So in the second root race, besides the sense of hearing, which we discussed was developing in the first root race, the sense of touch started to appear. Okay, so they started to respond actually. We started to respond, humanity started to respond to water, air, and fire. In the first root race, we were not responding to fire, so means fire was not destructive. So in the second root race, we were starting to respond actually to water, air, and fire because of the sense of touch was appearing. Then emotions from within were started to form, a sense of pleasure, a sense of pain, and then the race was called Children of the Sun. The yellow father and white mother. Okay, from the yellow father and the white mother. Yellow father represents fire and white mother representing water. Okay, so based on the book, their color of the skin was golden yellow, and they could float, they could glide, they could climb, they could even cry. Okay, so they could already cry, and the crying was like flute kind of sound. Okay. Then Initially, they again were multiplying by budding as before. Then it started to become drops of sweat. Okay, so it's like a drop of sweat comes out and then it grows to become another being. There is mentioning, in Puranic stories, there is they have mentioned about this, that the races were born from pores of the skin of ancestors. This is like the way of multiplication, which was from budding, changed to drops of sweat. Sexuality started to appear in the second root race, and mammals started to appear in the animals. Lower animals were made by nature spirits, and then mammals appeared. So during the first and second races, population of Earth was very limited. Then it comes the third root race, which is known as the Lemurians. During the time of the Lemurians, separation of sexes happened. Okay, so this happened on the third round. Also, now if you see, each round also connects with the root races. Okay, for example, first root race on the fourth round is very similar in quality to the first round human kingdom. Then second root race is a bit similar to the second round human kingdom, which we discussed about being like pudding type and then multiply by budding, and then later in the second root race of the fourth round became like sweat. So the third root race is also a bit similar to the human beings in the third round. So Earth is already more solid, and more land is being appeared. From foot of Himalayas to Ceylon, Sumatra, Australia, Tanzania, Easter Islands, and Madagascar, part of Africa. So all of this land already appeared. Included also Norway, Sweden, Siberia. So this whole vast continent was called Lemuria. Okay, ancient name is Shalmali. So human intelligence started to appear in this root race, the third root race. Through ages, the continent undergoes many disruptions and is broken up into great islands. Okay, so Norway sinks and then disappears. Later, it will appear again. Okay, so later there will be volcanic fire and the whole Lemuria disappears, while leaving fragments such as Australia and Madagascar. So Lemurians, actually their doomsday was by fire and suffocation. Okay, so when fire happened, and they all suffocated and the Lemuria disappeared. For Atlanteans, their doomsday was by fire. Okay. We will discuss about Atlanteans shortly. It's like a history lecture. So initially, Lemuria was like a very good climate and like tropical climate, but in the middle, about the middle of the Lemurian life, great changes of climate happens. Okay, sun was not shining as before. Okay, then they started to have ice and snow. Polar days and nights of 6 months started to begin. Now the seven sub-races, in the 7 sub-races, the physical body is changing very slowly, revisions taking place, separation of sexes happened. This third root race, which is Lemurian root race, remained for about 18 million years. And it was in the Jurassic period. Okay, the bones forming still like infant, like how the bones of infants are, it's a bit tender and it's weak. The bones were still like that, but at least forming. Only in the middle of the third race, solid bony structure appeared. So the first subroot race of the third root race, which is Lemurians, their way of reproduction was still like sweat-like, okay, so called sweat-born. Some of the backward entities from moon appeared here, okay, so they had like egg-headed, they were called egg-headed, and they had an eye on top of the head. And the forehead, if you remember, we said was like sausage-like. So this appeared and stayed there for some time. Then the basket work egos, who developed full causal bodies on Mars, appeared and took the lead. So this was the summary of the first subroot race of the Lemurian root race. Then second subrace, bodies started to harden. Okay. Now here, the humans were not producing like duplicating from sweat-like anymore. They started to have eggs. Can you believe it? Before we have the way of multiplication like now, we used to come out of egg also. So egg form, and within the egg, gradually this the new human body would form. So they were hermaphrodites, and first and second subraces are called early third because they are part of the third root race. Then the third subroot race appeared. Okay, they started to become thinner, and then they were developed within this envelope, evolved double sex organs, and when born, by breaking of the envelope like the egg, you know, like how the birds are coming out of the egg, something like that. They were fully developed still, like chicken. Okay, still hermaphrodites, but later one sex predominated, and later they developed into unisexual beings. So third and fourth subraces of the Lemurian root race are called Lords of Wisdom. Okay, they were still gigantic compared to what we are right now. The eyes started to develop. Okay, first, we didn't have these two eyes as we have right now. Initially, no two eyes. We had one eye on the forehead only. So single eye in the middle of the forehead. Later, this is called the third eye. Okay, so initially only one eye in the forehead area. And this third eye developed under the influence of the monad and had greater powers of vision compared to the two eyes, which will develop later on. So the third eye offered more power to monad, by physically the vision was, but physically the vision was more of a mass than detail. Okay, so the third, the one eye which was in the forehead was helping, giving more power to the monad. Okay, but it was not really like seeing everything in detail as we can see right now physically. It was more of like a seeing of the whole mass. Then the third race, having third eye, were still savages, but intuitional. Okay, they were responding to impulses sent by the divine. The remainings of the third eye is now pineal gland, okay, which in the spiritual world you know about this. And now is only astral vision. But for Lemurians, it was astral and physical. So they still didn't have these two eyes to see physical things. They would use that one eye in the forehead to see astrally, to see the inner world, and also to see the physical world. But physically, it was not as effective as the two eyes we have right now. Okay, so the first and second root races, not being fully physical, had no need to produce sound, okay, for conveying thoughts. But when fully physical in the third subrace, they started communicating with sound. Okay, it was mostly like vowels. Okay, so based on the book, the Chinese language is remaining of that. There is lots of vowels inside. Okay. But the first and second subroot races, because they still didn't have the physical body as it was on the third, they didn't have to really communicate with sound. Only this appeared in the third sub root race of the Lemurian root race. Okay, any question? Please put in the chat. Okay, but I feel like it's easy. Yeah, it's like a history kind of thing. It's like a story. Then we have the fourth sub-race of the Lemurian root race. And now one thing to notice that is not like changing from one root race to another root race is like there is a line. They overlap each other. Okay, so sometimes you have both or both of them appearing like staying there for some time. It's like a gradual change from one subroot race to another subroot race. Yes, today is easy and quite interesting also. I enjoy this part. Okay, so then we have separation of the sexes. This took about, based on the book, 5.5 to 6 million years ago. 5.5 to 6 million years. Some of the eggs were taken by lords of the moon, and they got special treatments. Special treatment was applied to them. By the end of the fourth subrace, creatures coming out of eggs could not walk, and they were helpless at birth. Okay, so if you remember earlier, we said when human beings were multiplying, the creature coming out of the egg or even coming out of this budding or sweat, it was already like a complete human. Okay, but in the fourth subrace, the creature coming out of the egg was very weak, like how we have the, the baby is weak and helpless, something like that. Okay, so the traces of sex duality never disappeared. Although already separation of sexes happened, but still we had cases that we had duality in one body. So many dropped out from moon appeared here, among which we had, do you remember in the previous session we discussed that different animals individualized through different things. One of them was because of fear, another one because of power, another one because of affection, another one because of the interest and eagerness to learn and obey. Another one was because of pride. So some of the ones individualized through fear appeared here. So with coming of lords of the moon in incarnation and separation of the sexes, the Satya Yoga or the golden ages of earth finished here. Okay, if you remember, we discussed about different ages. We have the golden ages until the dark ages. Okay, so golden ages finished here. So under the guidance of these lords of the moon as divine kings, the four subrace built mighty cities and temples. They built Shambhala itself. No, I don't know if you know about Shambhala, but every Vesak that we gather and meditate, and we talk about that. About 10 to 11 million years ago, separation of sexes was fully established, and humanity set to evolve. So when this happened, lords of the moon went back, okay, and later just periodically came and incarnate when the world wanted to renew. So initially, the lords of the moon from the moon chain came to earth to help development of the earth chain. So they stayed until the fourth subrace of the third root race, which is the Lemurians. And once the separation of sexes already happened and the earth was already like settled down, and the evolution already started to be something proper, they went back, but periodically we will see that they come back again to help, especially when the world needs to renew. Okay, so at this point we have 5 classes of humans. Number 1, the ones now coming from animal kingdom. Number 2, the line causal bodies, which we discussed previously, who are on Earth for some time. Okay, so this line causal bodies, if you remember when we discussed about the products of the moon chain, we said that their causal body is not developed at all. That's why we call it line causal body. So they started to come to the Earth chain from the beginning to develop their causal bodies. So they are also there. Then we have the basket work from Mars. Basket work means, if you remember, causal body is there, but it's not fully developed. It's like a skeleton is there. That's why it's called basket work. Then number 4, we have the best basket works from interchain nirvanas. And then 5th, with beings with complete causal bodies. Okay, so these 5 classes of humans are there in this sub-root race of the 3rd root race. So the forms thrown off by lords of the moon were fairly good looking, okay, but because etheric, they were readily modifiable and incoming egos distorted them. Therefore, their children were ugly. Okay, do you understand that? So it means the lords of the moon were creating forms, okay, because they wanted to develop humanity to be more better and better, okay, more and more developed. So the forms they were creating for the humanity to use were beautiful, were nice. But the human beings who were using them, because these forms were etheric, the human beings who were using them could easily modify. And because they still had certain thought forms from their previous shapes. Do you remember we just said they had egg heads, sausage foreheads? So their thought forms were changing the shape, and their children were ugly. Now, even now, they say if a person is pregnant, they need to look at beautiful bodies and listen to beautiful music and things like that so that they can modify the children, right? And in body sculpting, we already have learned how by changing the energy, we can change the physical shape. So these people, because they had certain ideas and certain thought forms already in their head, although they were using beautiful bodies, but their children became ugly because of that. So at this point, the 3 batches who individualized in moon chain offered to incarnate. This part is very interesting, okay? So do you remember we said that we had different animals who incarnated in the moon chain through different reasons I just discussed. One of them we call the orange group, another we call the yellow group, and another one the pink group. The orange group were the ones who individualized through pride. Yellow group were the ones who really wanted to learn and obey, and the pink group were the ones who individualized through affection. Okay, so at this point, because everything was almost ready and other backward, beings already developed to a certain degree that was similar to the degree of these group. So these group were offered to incarnate and continue their evolution. Okay? And interestingly, 1/3 of them refused to incarnate. 2/3 of them obeyed. Now, which group do you think refused? Question. You can put in the chat. Yes, out of the orange group, the yellow group, and pink group, which group do you think disobeyed and refused to incarnate? Yes, fantastic. Group with pride, the orange group. Okay, we said orange and the color is, pride, the color is orange. So the orange group refused to incarnate. The other 2/3, the yellow group and pink group, accepted. Now, why they refused? It was out of pride because the bodies which were prepared for them were not nice. So they didn't want to incarnate in those bodies. So when they saw the bodies offered to them, they refused to incarnate because they had pride. They were thinking They are better, they are best, so they should have nice bodies, not these bodies that are offered. But the yellow and pink group accepted and gradually improved the bodies. Okay, so therefore, so imagine this whole hierarchy and this, you know, let's call it the universe, the divine, already allocated certain bodies for these groups to incarnate, allocated certain area for these groups to incarnate and develop. Two of them accepted, two of these groups accepted and incarnated and developed. One of them didn't accept. So what happened? The area allocated for orange group remained vacant. The bodies which were kept for them to use gradually was used by entities emerging from animal kingdom. These created lowest human type. Therefore, humanity dropped backward actually to primitive intermingling with animals. And Madame Blavatsky called the act of this orange group the sin of mindless, because they caused the whole humanity to go backward. That's why I think Grandmaster says pride is the worst. Pride is the last to go, and it can cause the whole humanity to go backward. And then the karma came back to them. The karma of orange group was later, they were forced to incarnate and to take even lower bodies. And they passed through many unpleasant experiences. And later we will see in Atlantis, they become lords of dark face. And based on the book, based on Arthur Powell, we still see some of them till date. They practice black magic. They are called the lords of dark face. Okay, so, you know, like sometimes people ask if we have will or is it all forced? So you clearly see here, we have will. But when we choose something through our free will, we need to bear the consequences. Okay, so we are given opportunities. We can either grab the opportunity and grow, or if we don't, later on we will forced to do this because the whole humanity needs to evolve. And then the karma comes back. The karma of pride made them to incarnate in even lower bodies, and they actually suffered a lot. Okay, then we have the 6 sub-race. So here the Barishas from globe A, B, and C come to help the Manu to make sub-race 5, 6, and 7. A king initiate would gather a number around him and create a clan, and then teach the clan, you know, like Madagascar. This happened in Madagascar. Now the shape was being modified. The third eye was started to disappear and became the pineal gland. The 2 eyes became active. Okay, we still have monstrous animals. Animals were eaten raw. And what else? Yeah, that is mostly about the 5th root race, the 5th sub-root race. Then we have the 6th sub-race of the Lemurian root race. Their skin is like blue-black. Many initiates incarnated to help the Manu improve the bodies. So you see, in every root race and sub-root race, Manu is trying to develop the bodies. And the Manu will get help of many initiates to come and develop the bodies. And lastly, we have the 7th sub-race of the Lemurian root race. Okay, they were initially gray-blue, and then they ended to be gray-white. What else about them? The forehead is still like a roll of bone, and they are still like egg-headed. They had broad, flat noses, and they were great builders and had some idea of art. Okay, not very developed idea of art, but art already start to appear here. Then they created a civilization for thousands of years, a great city in Madagascar. Another one in Easter Islands that got destroyed by volcano. And the remaining in Africa, Aboriginals of Australia, we still have like remaining of them, and some hill tribes in India. So these are some of the remaining of the Lemurian and the seventh subrace of the Lemurian root race, okay, which was the third root race. Now here we have the coming of the Lords of Venus. Do you remember in earlier sessions we discussed about Lord Sanat Kumara and this, oops. I think I got disconnected. Sorry, so let's continue. So at this point, can you hear my voice? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I got disconnected, sorry. So at this point, when we had this seven sub-race of the Lemurian root race, we have coming of the Lords of Venus. If you remember in earlier sessions, we discussed that Lord Sanat Kumara with a few other students, disciples of him, came down to earth chain to help the earth chain develop. And we discussed that because of them, certain is like it was a push for animal kingdom to incarnate faster, because although the door was about to shut from this change from animal kingdom to human kingdom, and because of them, humanity started to develop intellect to what it is right now, although it was planned for it to be developed more on the next round, which is the fifth round. So they appeared in the middle of third root race, which is the Lemurian root race, after separation of sexes. Now all the dropouts, all the animals ready to become, so now all the dropouts came to earth chain from the moon chain. All the animals ready to become human already became human, and the door was about to shut. So based on the book, it was about 16.5 million years ago. The sons of flame from Venus' scheme came to Earth, and Lord Sanat Kumara came with his assistants. They projected sparkle of mind into the mindless men and awakening intellect in them. They made bodies through Kriya Shakti. If you remember, we said they couldn't actually incarnate in human bodies. So they had to make bodies for themselves through Kriya Shakti, which means using the mind, power of the mind to materialize things. And they incarnated using those bodies. But because the body was not really human body, it was made out of Kriya Shakti, the body was not following the decay of the human body. So they wouldn't become old, they wouldn't age. So the bodies they used were like that. So because of them, humanity started to develop intellect. Although fourth round was supposed to focus on desire, on emotion, but their coming helped us to develop intellect as well. Okay, so that was the summary of the whole third root race, which is the Lemurian root race. Then we start to have the fourth root race, which is known as the Atlantean root race. Okay, now for Atlantean root race, we had different maps, and they had lots of catastrophes happening. We will talk about it shortly because of certain practices they did, misusing the powers, black magic, and all of this. So a lot of changes happen in the map, okay? For example, in 9565 before Christ, BC, Poseidonis was finally submerged through earthquake and volcano, okay? And the whole land sank. And with it, 64 million inhabitants also sank. So besides the 4 major catastrophes, we also had many smaller ones. So we had 4 major catastrophes, but we also had many smaller ones, many smaller ones. And the priests of the good, means the priests who were following white magic, they were following the correct way, they knew about these catastrophes. But nobody followed them or listened to them. That's why they had lots of catastrophes. Okay, so now let's talk about the sub-races of this Lemurian root race. Okay, the first sub-race was called Muahal. Okay, so the Sanat Kumara, head of the hierarchy, began almost immediately after his coming to Earth to make arrangements for founding the 4th root race. Okay, so we said they appeared in the middle of the 3rd root race, so they started immediately to create the 4th root race. Okay, so much difficulty seems to have been experienced, tribes being segregated, their members intermarrying for long period. So the best being then selected and paired off with the best of another segregated party. The Manu and his disciples also incarnated in order to improve the physical type. Okay, so sometimes just to create better bodies and improved bodies, they would not allow intermarriage. Okay, and sometimes the Manu himself would appear and then get married to, like, they choose the best of, you know, the race, and then they create the new one. So finally, the Manu took the bodies of the Lemurian 7 subrace, who we said were bluish-white, improved by initiates using them as the nucleus of his first subrace, which was the Muahal. The Manu had eliminated the blue from the color of his people, passing through purple into red, and then by mixing in blue-white of the Lemurian 7 subrace, obtained a type for the Muahal, which we should call fully human, and that we could imagine as living among ourselves. About 1 million years were spent in establishing the race type. Lot of care and trouble having been taken to reach a fair resemblance to the type given to the Manu to produce. Okay, do you remember we said that the seed Manu gather everything and has a certain idea in his mind and then pass it to the root Manu, and the job of the root Manu is to follow that. So they are trying to create changes in the bodies and reach to that idea which was given to them. Okay, what should be the shape and characteristics of a certain root race? Everything is already set. It's like the idea is already there. The blueprint is already there. So they are trying to modify the bodies and reach to that idea, to that plan. So after many generations passed before the young race took possession of its continent, the Atlantis. But from this point onwards, batches of egos began to come in from the interchain nirvana, the ones who were kept, you know, in nirvanic form until they, in nirvana until they incarnate again, to inhabit the 4th race bodies. So we may note here that the Manu of the 4th root race was one of the adepts from Venus. We still don't have any official who were product of the Earth chain itself. It is convenient at this point to indicate the method by which a root race is developed from its previous one. Okay, the general principle seems to be that a root race is developed from numerically corresponding subrace of the preceding root race. Okay, for example, the 4th root race should by the rule have been developed from the 4th subrace of the 3rd root race. Do you understand? The 5th root race is developed from the 5th subrace of the 4th root race. And the 6th root race, which is about, like, will come in the future, will be developed from the 6th subrace of the 5th root race. We are now in the 5th root race. And the 6th sub root race of our 5th root race is about to come, like, is coming. Okay, this is just a note. Okay, so this Muahal race came into existence between 4 to 5 million years ago, and much of Lemuria still existed. And Atlantis had not yet become as large as it eventually will become. Okay, what else is important? The Muahals, being the children of the new race, were themselves incapable of developing any plan of settled government, nor did they reach even as high a point of civilization as the Lemurian 6 and 7 subraces. They were ruled, therefore, by the Manu himself, or by other adept or divine ruler. Okay, they were to some extent psychic, and these people adopted a religion which was not really profoundly philosophical, but it was still a religion. And in later days, this phase of religious belief passed into a kind of ancestor worship. Okay, art and science is there, but not yet very developed. Okay, after them, the second Atlantean subrace appears. Okay, these are called Lawatli. They were red-brown color, powerful, quite tall, not as tall as Moahals though. They settled chiefly in mountainous districts and in an area which later became the island of Poseidonis. Okay, and then their colonies, a considerable empire was eventually established among them, and their colonies spread outward in every direction. A mixture of this subrace and the third subrace, the Toltec, inhabited the western islands, which later formed part of the American continent. Okay. Later period, they occupied the south of South America. The Lawalti inherited the traditional reverence and worship for the Manu, but were taught by their adept instructions to recognize a supreme being whose symbol was the sun. So they somehow developed a sort of sun worship. Okay, and then for that they were using top of hills, and in top of hills they built circles. Okay, and they were using these circles also for astronomical purposes. They again had art and science, but not so developed. So after them, we have the third Atlantean subrace, which is called the Toltec. The subrace took its rise near the west coast of Atlantis. The people were rich, red-brown, and they were tall, averaging about 8 feet, but later started to become shorter. The type was an improvement on the two previous subraces, the features being straight and well marked, not unlike the ancient Greek. The subrace was a magnificent development, the most splendid and imperial of the Atlantean people, ruling the whole of Atlantis for thousands of years in great material power and glory. Okay, even hundreds of thousands of years later, we find them still ruling magnificently in Mexico and Peru. At first, they were divided into a number of pretty independent kingdoms, and they were at war with each other and with the Lemurio Muahal of the south. About 1 million years ago, after great wars, the separate kingdoms united in a great federation with an emperor at its head. Okay, and the second of these emperors was the Manu, who founded the city of the Golden Gates, the first of many cities of that name. He also arranged for the incarnation at this time of a number of egos with complete causal bodies from globe D, the moon, of the moon chain, who had individualized in the lunar 4th and 5th rounds. You see, this one we discussed before. So we have many products of every chain. Okay, some of them already reached the goal and they don't need to incarnate anymore. Some of them, they don't reach the goal, but they're little lower than that. So these people, they don't appear in the first round of the next chain. They only appear in the middle, okay, when everybody else has already achieved a certain degree of development. Okay, at this time, a group of servers also appeared to come, containing certain characters known in the lives of Alcyon, such as Sirius, Orion, Leo. If you have read the book Lives of Alcyon, you know about them. Also in Lives of Orion, it also talks about them. Okay, so for thousands of years, the divine dynasty ruled Atlantis, the islands on the west, and the southern portion of the land lying to the east. Usually the power was handed down from father to son, and the dynasty being, when necessary, recruited from the lodge of the initiates. This was the golden age of the Toltecs, the rulers acting in harmony with the occult hierarchy. Government was accordingly just and beneficent. Art and science were cultivated with the assistance of occult knowledge. They achieved tremendous results. Religious beliefs and rituals were still comparatively pure. In fact, the Atlantean civilization was in its height at this point. After about 100,000 years of this golden age, then they started to degenerate because they started to become selfish. Instead of focusing on the benefit of everybody, they started to think about themselves. And then they started to break their connection with the occult hierarchy. And the black art started to spread. So it means the black magic started to appear. Then they had lost brutality, and the animal nature really appeared. Eventually, the followers of the black arts rose in rebellion and set up a rival emperor, who after much struggle and fighting, drove the white emperor from his capital city. Do you remember we said the main civilization was the city of the Golden Gates? So it had emperors, and these emperors were in connection with the hierarchy, spiritual hierarchy. And the emperor was, initially the second emperor was the Manu himself, and this, it was like from generation to another generation, from father to son, they were ruling until black magic started to appear. People started to become very selfish. They focused about themselves, and then they rose in rebellion. The black emperor brought down the white emperor, and then they wanted him out of the city of the Golden Gates and established himself on his throne. The white emperor moved northward and re-established himself a city, another city. So the emperor of the north, as well as the initiated priests throughout the whole continent, had long been fully aware of the catastrophes that are about to happen. Each one, therefore, became a center of prophetic warnings. So the white emperor and also all of these priests, they knew that what they are doing is wrong. And using black magic and all of this black art is wrong. And a lot of catastrophes is about to happen. And they warned all of them, but nobody really listened. Okay, if you read religious books, there is a lot of stories about this also. Okay, so in the later days, the rulers of the country deeply resented these priests. And therefore, because the priests were warning people and they were asking them to leave the city, they were leading in migrations. So the other group which were following the black art, they actually started to resent them. And then they didn't want to allow them to do this. And about 800,000 years ago, the first great catastrophe happened. The whole continent being terribly rent, whole provinces rendered by tidal waves, and the city of the Golden Gates got destroyed. The Black Emperor and his dynasty also fell. Okay? Now, during this period, someone who is later becoming Julius Caesar came from the city of the Golden Gates and conquered the Lavatli tribe, in which some members of the group mentioned were incarnated. He treated the tribe kindly, assisted it, and incorporated it into the Toltec Empire. Okay, so when the Toltecs were at their zenith, the continent of Atlantis was probably as densely populated as England and Belgium right now. The population of the world being about 2,000 million. The Toltecs, having migrated chiefly to the west, spread abroad and flourished on what are now the continents of North and South America. Okay, so the best representatives of the Toltecs today is the average red Indian of North and South America. So about 400,000 years ago, Egypt, being then isolated and thinly populated, a lot of initiates, because of the spread of the black arts, in their own country, they went to Egypt. And for nearly 200,000 years did their work there. About 210,000 years ago, the occult lodge founded the first divine dynasty of Egypt, and an empire bringing over for the purpose and the first great body of colonists. Between then and 200,000 years ago, the two great pyramids of Giza was built, partly to provide permanent halls of initiation and partly to act as treasure house and shrine for some great talisman of power during the submergence, which the initiates knew was happening, was about to come. Okay, what else? So the spread of black magic led up to the second great catastrophe in about 200,000 BC. See, every time certain catastrophe happens, they started to realize this is not good, they have to improve. And then they improve, but we forget. So humanity forget. Again, they went back to black magic. Then again, second catastrophe happened. Then again, they start to change. They think of change. But again, they go back to the same old pattern. And then the third catastrophe comes, and finally the fourth catastrophe appears. Okay, so in 200,000 BC, when the great continent was reduced to the two islands, Ruta and Daitya is like North and South America. So for the next 100,000 years, the people of Atlantis flourished, building up a mighty but over-luxurious civilization. The capital was once more the city of the Golden Gates, the Toltec dynasty again rising to power, 5 on the island of Ruta, and ruling a large portion of the island. Again, this dynasty also got addicted to the black craft. You see, we don't learn. That's why we keep attracting certain negative patterns that we discussed in previous, sessions of esoteric studies. Okay, so then we have the third catastrophe, in which we had explosions of gas, floods, and earthquakes, destroyed Ruta and Daitara, which is, we said, North and South America, and only Poseidonis remained. This was the catastrophe of 7025 BC. In this catastrophe, the Himalayas were heaved up a little higher, the land south of India was submerged, Egypt was drowned, only the pyramids being left standing. Okay. But this was not the end. We have one more coming later. Another tidal wave swept over Egypt when Poseidonus was submerged in the year 9564 BC. So Atlantis was hit by 4 catastrophes. Okay, let's continue with the next subroot trace. So there is some explanation about Peru and one of the cities. So if you want, you can read the book. So let's go to the 4th Atlantean subrace, the Turanians. Okay, the Turanian or 4th subrace arose on the eastern side of the continent, south of the mountains inhabited by the Lawatlis. In the period 800,000 to 200,000 years ago, they lived further south, occupying the country where Morocco and Algeria now are. They occupied also both the east and west coast of the Central Asian Sea. Some moved still further east, the inland Chinese being today the nearest approximation to them. Okay? Being continually defeated in war by the Toltecs, who greatly outnumbered them, and desiring increase of population, every man was by law relieved from the direct burden of maintaining his family. The state regarding all children as its property, and therefore providing for them. The Turanians were the first of the 4 later yellow subraces. They used the Lawatli tongue as basis, but later modified their own. At one time, they experimented in democracy, carrying it to even wider lengths than its most advocates today have suggested. The results were so intolerable that the whole race broken up into chaos. So after them, we have the 5th Atlantean subrace. The 5th subrace rose in mountainous country Sorry, I got disconnected again. Today is something with the internet. Okay, so we have the 5th Atlantean subrace. This Atlantean subrace were mostly living like nomadic, okay, and then they were always at war with their neighbors. During the period 800,000 to 200,000 years ago, they spread both west and east. From them, we have the seed of the 5th root race, which is us. Now, the 6th Atlantean subrace are called the Akkadian. The 6th or Akkadian subrace arose after the great catastrophe of the 800,000 years ago in the land east of Atlantis. They had a dual system of 2 kings reigning in one city. And then they made great advances both in astronomy and in astrology. In early Akkadian days, about 100,000 years ago, a colony of initiates founded Stonehenge on what was then the Scandinavian part of Europe. The Akkadians, the 3rd of the 4th later yellow subraces. And lastly, we have the 7th Atlantean subrace, which are the Mongolian. The Mongolian or 7th subrace seems to have been the only one which had no touch with the mother continent. It arose on the plains of eastern Siberia, and it was directly descended from the Turanian race, which it gradually got the most of Asia. It multiplied exceedingly so that even at the present day, a majority of the Earth's inhabitants technically belong to them. Being more religious as well as more psychic, they were more religious and more psychic than Turanians. The Mongolians, like the Turanians, were yellow in color. And then we have the beginnings of the fifth root race, which is known as the Aryan root race. So the first decisive step in founding the race was about 100,000 years ago, when a tribe of the Atlantean fifth subrace, they were white in color and they were isolated in mountains. This subrace was addicted to mountains. Their religion was different from that of the Toltecs, living in the plains, a fact of which the Manu took advantage to effect the isolation. Then the Bodhisattva, the fourth Lord Buddha, founded a new religion. Those who came into it were told to keep apart and forbidden to intermarry with other tribes. Okay, so if you remember, we just said that from the fifth sub-root race of the fourth root race, the fifth root race appeared, which is the Aryan root race. Okay. Now this fifth sub-root race of the Atlantean root race were living in mountains. They really loved mountains and they were already isolated. So Manu took advantage of this because he didn't want the race to intermarry others and change. They wanted to shape, the bodies and the tribe to become what they had in mind for the fifth root race, which we are right now. The people were told that they were under a king and lord, physically unknown to them, and that they would be taken away to a promised land. Owing to the impeding subdual of the fifth subrace by the dark ruler, the Manu in the year 79,797 shipped his people off through the Sahara Sea and then by land to Arabia. Okay, so it means that the Manu already knew about the catastrophes that are to happen, right? So they took this group and then they migrated them to Arabia. 3 trips were made and about 9,000 people were brought over, together with some animals which were a sort of mixture of buffalo, elephant, pig. Out of the 9,000 people, 6 were from the fifth subrace, and 1/12 were Akkadian and 1/12 were Toltec. Each group the best of its kind. So it's like they chose the best and then they wanted to create a new root race. So the rest, led by Manu, reached the Arabian highlands by way of what is now the route of the Suez Canal. So after this, the colonists lived in peace for some time, cultivating their land and using various kinds of seeds they had brought from Atlantis. In about 2,000 years, they numbered several millions. They were all isolated from the world by a belt of sand, the only way across it with grass and water being about where Mecca now stands. The least desirable types were sent away as immigrants, one party going to the south of Palestine, another going to the south of Egypt. In one of the colonies, the horse was developed. Occasionally, in order to improve the human type, the Manu himself incarnated. So a few years before the catastrophe of the year 75,000 BC, under instructions from the head of the hierarchy, the Manu selected about 700 of his own descendants and made them into an unorthodox and strict sect. He formed them into a caravan and set off northwards. Okay, you see, because they didn't want that group to be affected, they actually selected them and then they sent them to certain areas to be saved. Okay, so The Manu, by this time, he was an old man, was ordered to bring his people to the White Island. There he was shown the plan of the future, stretching over tens of thousands of years. The Manu was instructed to plant certain selected families in these valleys and develop from them 4 separate sub-races, which were then to be sent out to different parts of the world. Some of his own people were to be born in the outer world and were then to return and marry into his family in order to improve the racial type. He himself was then to incarnate and fix the improved type. You see how he was incarnating several times himself to improve the race, and some of his initiates, some of his students were sent to develop in other tribes and races and then come back and marry his family and improve. Like that, they start to improve the humanity step by step in every root race like that, and in every sub-root race. So soon after, the Turanians swept down on the community and eventually annihilated it. The descendants of the children who had been saved eventually founded another populous and flourishing civilization. Okay, they created the city of the bridge. So out of this, the first Aryan sub-race appeared, which is known as the Hindu. So from the small beginning of 60,000 BC, there grew up a thickly populated kingdom surrounding the Gobi Sea and gradually obtaining domination over many neighboring nations, including the Turanians, who had so mercilessly massacred, their forefathers. So the parent race sent out no less than 4 migrations westward, and they flourished exceedingly, reaching its zenith about 45,000 BC. It conquered China and Japan, peopled chiefly by Mongols, the 7th Atlantean subrace, going northward and eastward until stopped by the cold. They spread also over the Malay Peninsula, Philippines, the Eastern Archipelago, and also Australia. They were not primitive at all. The whole population could read and write. All work was considered honorable, no matter what it was, being done for the Manu. Okay, the only thing which was not good was not to be responsible, not to do something that helped the Manu and the civilization. Whilst personal merit was fully recognized, there was respect and gratitude for the greater people and complete absence of self-assertion. So they were mostly working selflessly. The people trusted one another, gave each other credit for good intentions, and therefore did not quarrel. Very different was this from the elaborate and luxurious Atlantean civilization, where each sought his own comfort and recognition for himself. Okay, so it's like with the Aryans, a man's word was sufficient. In governing foreign nations, whilst not cruel or oppressive, they were yet stern and a bit hard. The civilization was bright and happy, with much music, dancing, religion being one of praise and thanksgiving. The people were constantly singing hymns of praise and recognizing devas behind natural forces. Okay? The 4 Kumaras were regarded as gods, and their presence was evidently felt by the people, so near to nature as to be sensitive and psychic. The planet Venus also was an object of worship because of the Lord Kumara and the 4 Kumaras. There was held every midsummer day in the city of the bridge the festival of the sacred fire. Instead of newspaper, clairvoyants obtained any news required from any part of the empire, as we do in modern days by wireless or other, telegraphy and internet and messaging. The clairvoyants could see any news that you want from any part of the region. Machinery was simpler than in Atlantis, and there was more hard work. So the Manu evidently wished to avoid the extreme luxury of Atlantis. By 40,000 BC, the empire began to decline, the islands and outer provinces asserting a barbarian independence. The Manu still occasionally incarnated, but usually directed from higher planes. Okay, so that was the first Aryan root race, the first Aryan sub-root race known as the Hindu. Then we have the second Aryan sub-race known as the Arabian. Okay, so what is important about them is in the third generation, Mars and Mercury. This Mars and Mercury is not, the planet. If you remember previously, we also talked about them. They are actually people. Mars and Mercury took birth among the descendants of this group, and some of the great people incarnated to specialize the type. Initially, when a sub-race is appearing, a lot of these higher initiates, they appear to develop the race, and then they don't need to incarnate anymore. But initially, they incarnate themselves, sometimes even the Manu incarnate himself to develop the race to be what the blueprint is, what is supposed to be. Okay, so under the leadership of Mars, they retrace the steps of their previous race with the intention of Aryanizing the Arabs. Of all the Atlanteans were the nearest to the possession of the new characteristics. Okay, by Aryan, we just mean to make them aligned to the fifth root race. Okay. What else about them is important? So while this long struggle was going on, the Mahaguru, who is the future Gautama Buddha, came to the second sub-race of the fifth root race to give it the new religion, which he had been teaching in Egypt as a reform of the ancient faith there prevailing. The Mahaguru came to these people as Tehuti or Thoth, called later by the Greek Hermes. His doctrine was that of the inner light. From Egypt, as said, the Mahaguru went to Arabia to teach his doctrine to the second sub-race. The second sub-race grew and increased for many thousands of years, extending its dominion over nearly all Africa, except that part possessed by Egypt. But later they invaded Egypt also. The servers, after several births in Arabia, took part in the building of the South African Empire, Mars being there as monarch. When the great Sumero-Akkad Empire of Persia, Mesopotamia, and Turkestan finally broke up into small states and disorder, an Arab monarch fought it for 20 years and made himself master of the plains of Mesopotamia and of almost the whole of Persia. After the final collapse of the Arabian Empire of Persia, and there were centuries of anarchy and bloodshed. The country is becoming populated, so the Manu determined to come to their rescue and sent to them his third sub-race, which established a great Persian empire of the Iranians. So the third Aryan root race, the third Aryan sub-race is known as the Iranian. Okay, so the people of the young third sub-race multiplied, and they They had agriculture, but they also had large herds of sheep and cattle and horses. In 2 years, Persia was overrun without much difficulty, and then Mesopotamia was subdued. For the next 50 years, the Manu kept the new empire under his direct rule, visiting it several times and appointing members of his family as its governors. With certain changes, its empire lasted until about 2200 BC. So means for 28,000 years. Cool. So in the Mahaguru, the future Gautama Buddha came to the third sub-race as the first we call it Zoroaster, and founded the religion of the fire. Surya, who will be the future Lord Maitreya, was the chief priest at that time, and at the head of the state religion, which was a mixture of nature and star worship. Okay, so the Mahaguru remained for a considerable time in the city, going daily to temple to instruct the priests. He taught them that fire and water were the purifiers. So that's how we have purification by fire, purification by water, and must never be polluted. And that even the water was purified by fire. That fire and water were the two spirits, fire being life and water form. Astrology there reached its zenith and scientifically guided human affairs, both public and private. Okay, so they were the third sub-root race of the fifth root race, known as the Iranians. Then we have the fourth sub-race of the Aryan root race, the Celtic. Okay, so by this time, the great Central Asian race was far on the road to its decline. But the Manu had been careful to preserve dignity, power, and the seed of the fourth and fifth sub-races, to which he had given much special training. Okay, so eventually they established themselves in the district of Irwan. Hello again. Today we keep disconnecting. Okay. So this fourth sub-root race of the Aryan root race started to establish themselves in Irwan, and then in 2000 years they occupied Armenia and Kurdistan, and then eventually they went to Europe. So at this time in 9564 BC, the terrible wave created by sinking of Poseidonus happened and destroyed most of the Greek settlements and seriously injured the remainder. Both the Gobi Sea and the Sahara Desert became dry land. Okay, so as we discussed, some of them, they went eventually to Europe, and then they created the races in Italy, in France, in Belgium, the British Isles, and the western part of Switzerland and Germany. Here the Mahaguru came again to them as Orpheus, the founder of Orphic mysteries, from which the later mysteries of Greece were derived. And finally, we have the fifth sub-race, the Teutonic. The fifth sub-race was strong and vigorous, much larger than the fourth, and was tall, fair, long-headed, with light hair and blue eyes. The character also was very different from that of the Celts. The fifth sub-race, small in number, moved along the shores of Caspian Sea and settled in Dagestan. There it grew slowly for thousands of years, extending along the northern slopes of the Caucasian range and occupying the Terek and Kuban districts. So the swamps of Central Europe having now become habitable, the immigrants moved northwest to what is now Poland. It was chiefly from, so from Poland, they also developed and spread to Lithuania and again to Germany. The third wave went to Germany. And again, later events show the rising of India into her proper place as it is right now, as an empire. Each root race has its own special quality to unfold. That of fifth root race is manas, or the mind. That type of intellect to discriminate, to know the difference between things. Okay, do you remember we said each round is also connected with each root race, and each sub-root race of the previous root race is connected with the number of the root race. So the fifth round is connected with mind or intellect. So this fifth root race of the fifth sub-root race of the fifth root race is also connected with the mind, developing the intellect. So then from there, the fifth root race went back again to India and developed India as it is right now. Okay. Then we have the Aryan sixth sub-race. We don't have them fully yet, but they are appearing. The sixth sub-race of the fifth root race is already rapidly coming into existence in Australia and America, with isolated members of it in the older countries. Now, those of the new sub-race who remain in the old countries will probably have more difficulties to face because of the pressure of old ideas and conservative customs. Many members of the present Theosophical Society will be born into this new race. Now, the sixth sub-race is coming, okay? And we will discuss shortly what will happen then. You know, the world will change really to a very much better place. And a lot of initiates, and as the book says, many members of the present Theosophical Society will born again into this new race. The form of body, emotions, and mind, of course, will be modified to suit the new sub-race. Already the modifying power of the Manu's mind and will is at work on the inner planes, modifying the physical type of children of the new age. Okay, so education and training, they still need education and training. Okay. This work of educating them and training them, small as yet, is destined to swell to enormous proportions until within a few centuries, the fifth sub-race will stand out distinct and admirable. Okay, so their faces will be very much oval shape. They will have long fingers with long oval nails. The body will be very well shaped and very delicate. The skin will be very delicate and soft. The texture of the skin is clear and it will not be coarse. So in the future, when they are appearing based on the book, by their look, we will know if they are part of the sixth sub-root race of the fifth root race. Now, their psychology is response to sympathy, pity in suffering. Okay, and they have quick intuitions. They are very sensitive. They want justice. They don't want intelligence, which is like parrots repeating things. They like to learn. They like to investigate. They like to study. They dislike coarse food, like meat, and they will not have appetite in those lines. A special mark of the consciousness is the recognition of unity, the quality we name brotherhood, which makes for compassion and self-sacrifice. Okay, so instead of the mind dividing, they like uniting. And as the book says, the spirit unites what the intellect divides. Okay, so they are more of like uniting nature. They have uniting nature. They are very sensitive. Initially, I think I heard from someone, I cannot remember who, one of the seniors, that when Grandmaster made the ashram, he told them, this is not for you. This is for my future students to come. And then he made the ashram, if you have been there, very specifically using Feng Shui. And I even heard from another person that the new generation who are coming, they are very sensitive. They will not like sharp edges. Now, if you have done Feng Shui, you will know that sharp edges create sharp chi and actually affect the aura. So this new generation will be very sensitive. So actually the current cities that we have with this current architecture that we have, I think it will not be very suitable for them. And their houses will be more of like dome shape, and then also very soft. As Arka is saying, Acharya Daphne actually said that, and Acharya Dani and Shiram also repeated that. Thank you so much. So this future generation will be like that. And I remember also when you said Acharya Daphne, Master Daphne said, for them, healing is like built inside. You know, we are trying to develop the healing power and to heal. For them, it's like when they're born, healing is already built in. They have the ability to heal. They are more sensitive. They like unity, and they don't like to focus on themselves and divide. So based on the book, hence an environment gentler and more harmonious than that usually to be found in the cities is needed for them, for the children of the new race. So if someone makes a mistake, they don't judge the person, they don't punish the person, they actually feel sympathy, and they help the person to learn and grow. This new race will possess certain psychic powers. And we can say in general that the sixth root race will bring in, the sixth sub-root race will bring in intuition and wisdom, blending all that is best in the intelligence of the fifth sub-race and the emotion of the fourth. Okay, so that will be the sixth sub-root race of the fifth root race, which is coming right now. So we call them like the new generation. So they need education, and they will need different types of architecture, different types of cities. What we have is not really suitable. And finally, after this 6 sub-root race and 7 sub-root race finish, we will have the 6 and 7 root race. So in accordance with the general plan, the 6th root race will be created from the 6th sub-race of the 5th root race. It will eventually take possession of a continent now rising slowly, fragment by fragment in the Pacific. Many thousands of years, hence North America will be shattered into pieces, the western stripe on which the 6th root race will be founded. So initially there will be a very little colony, and which will be the germs of the new race is going to be, founded there. The 5th race will be at its zenith at that time, and all the glory of the world will be concentrated there. This colony will be a poor thing in the eyes of the world, a gathering of cranks devoted to their leaders. Mars, who is now the Chohan Moria, will be the Manu of 6th race, and Mercury, who is now the Chohan Kutumi, will be the Bodhisattva of the 6th root race. Okay. The Manu himself will incarnate in order to set the physical type of the race and bring it into line with the thought form of the logos for the 6th race. After about 150 years, the community numbers about 100,000, all of them with a few exceptions, direct descendants of the Manu. The Manu himself has 12 children, one born under each sign of zodiac. So they allow the visitors to come in and visit, it's like tourists, to visit their colony, but they are not allowed to enter, marry with them. The Manu's rule is undisputed. He has a council of about 1,000 highly developed pupils, some of them already in Aseka level. It's very interesting because they don't have courts of law, they don't have police, there is no crime or violence. The only punishment would be expulsion from the community, and no one would run the slightest risk of incurring such a penalty. They will have developed psychic powers. There is no death, very interestingly. And there is no death. The moment you don't want to continue living anymore, you will die during sleep time. And that is only when the body is not capable of working anymore. Okay, and then the devas, in fact, work regularly under the chief priests. There is a chief priest and the devas work under them, and who is in supreme charge both of religion and education. The Chohan Kutumi, okay, is the chief priest. Based on the book, for the 6 root rays, there are 4 types of temple service, the management of this being the special function of the devas. And there are 4 kinds of temples. Work through affection, devotion, sympathy, and intellect. One is called the crimson or affection temple, which works principally by colors. The other one is the blue or devotional temple, which works principally with sound and music. The next one is the sympathy or green temple, which is for karma yoga, for healing. And they work under the guidance of the healing devas. And last one is yellow, which is for intelligence. The yellow or intellectual temple. A service of identical structure is performed like the other ones. Okay, they create mental forms or images. What else? So we said this doesn't exist as we experience it right now. It's basically voluntarily, and there is no disease, therefore there is no hospitals, there is no accident, only in rare cases. Everybody dies out of old age when you think the body is incapable of continuing life anymore. And then it's very interesting, you will go and find a certain family to be your parents, and then you make a certain, promise that, okay, I will be born under you, and then this person who is going to die will give them a jewel. Now this jewel in this jewel, they have impregnated magnetism of the man. It's like the energy of the whole man, the whole person who is dying is inside the jewel. So they will give this jewel to the family that they are going to born under. And then after they are born, through certain rituals, certain practices, they will help the child who is just born to remember his past life and continue from there. So as a general rule, people are karmically free to choose their next birth. Though in rare cases, the Manu may alter the plan if he does not approve of it. What else? Marriage is still happening, and divorce is no longer there. But if both parties they don't want to be in relationship anymore, they can terminate, the marriage using mutual consent. The greatest honor will be to be born in the family of the Manu. But of course, Mono will choose his own children. Most houses are dome shaped in different sizes, and they are more circular and oval. There is no sharp edges actually. There is very little furniture. People sit and sleep on cushions on the floor, which are marble or other polished stone. The whole community is entirely vegetarian. Okay, so the study of animals and plants are not done by destruction, but by clairvoyance. Astronomical observation exists, and what else? They don't use money. Okay. They have jewels and gold, but they make it through alchemy whenever they need. Everyone is free to choose what work he will do for the community. Education is free, but university training is only provided if the job you choose requires training. Each person receives a number of tokens entitling him to food and clothing. The average hour of work is about 3 hours. And the machinery is very largely automated, and even the automated machinery make machinery. There is no dirty work. No work is considered inferior, actually. There is little private property. The principle of the community is to enjoy things, not to own them. Yeah, 3 hours. 3 hours of work. I remember actually Grandmaster said in business management, if you really work intelligently and properly, you don't need to work 8-10 hours. You can just work 3-4 hours, and you have the productivity to finish all your work. Okay, Europe becomes a confederation at this point. Poverty has already disappeared. Crime is much reduced in even other parts of the world rather than just this community itself. So the opportunity of volunteering for the work is open to all. And this is even what we discussed is like heaven is just in the beginning of the 6 root race. And it will develop even more and more, better and better. Okay, so about the 7 root race, very less is known right now. But as we see, it's just improving. And we will at some point have heaven on earth in the future. We still need to go through the 6 sub-root race of the 5th root race, and then 7 sub-root race of the 5th root race, and then only the 6th root race appear. And after 6 root race, after the 7 sub-root races of the 6th root race, then we will have the 7 root race. Okay, we finished the book, and I hope you really enjoyed the session. This session itself was like a history, going through what happened and what is yet to come. So, but what we can see right now is humanity is becoming more and more sensitive to energy, developing more and more psychic powers, clairvoyance, and this new generation is coming, but they need education. So we need to provide that, that environment for them. And to build the 6 sub-root race of the 5th root race, a lot of initiates and, spiritual practitioners and even members of the Theosophical Society will be born again to build the 6 sub-root race. And yeah, so we are preparing, we are helping to prepare the environment for their coming. Any question? Hope you enjoyed the whole book. I know it was a very hard book, but the good thing about studying the solar system is in the future, if you read any other Theosophy book or any other book in this, about esoteric sciences, you can understand it much better because you have seen the whole picture. You know it from a wider perspective. So it will make it much easier to understand later different aspects of it. So the next book will be about thought forms, will be done by my dear friend Arkadeb, and we will post the details in the group this week. So you can still make a contribution for that. And that book is actually very interesting, fun, lots of pictures explaining about different thought forms, how they are observed, clairvoyantly. So I'm sure you will enjoy. It's not this heavy, and it's quite fun and interesting also. So hope to have you in the future sessions, and if you have been enjoying these sessions, please recommend this to other people, because what we need actually to improve the humanity and help in manifesting the divine plan is education. So as you saw how understanding about this whole scheme of evolution and the whole solar system opened our minds, and now we look at the whole humanity, we look at the whole divine plan and how we can be instrumental in manifesting it. It can also do this to other people, so we can do it together faster, and we can work together to manifest and materialize Grandmaster's great vision, which is to have heaven on earth in less than 150 years. Because when he said it, now already some years has passed. So we need to actually spread the light, spread pranic healing, one pranic healer per family, spread the knowledge, and to bring heaven on earth and materialize his vision. Okay, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next session. Atma Namaste.